are just under 2 weeks out from the election and still without an endorsement from the Washington Post. Post staffers are reportedly blaming Bezos, Jeff Bezos, the owner, for the delay, according to independent journalist Oliver Darcy. It's believed the editorial board has already written its backing for Harris, but has not gotten the green light to publish it from Bezos and the editor-in-chief, a former Murdoch employee. Insiders reportedly speculate that Bezos, who has yet to speak publicly about the 2024 election, does not want to alienate former President Donald Trump. The paper supported Biden in 2020 and Clinton in 2016 and published those endorsements much earlier in the cycle.
It all comes as the LA Times editorial editor resigned this week after billionaire owner Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong prohibited the paper from making an endorsement, as it had for every presidential race since 2008. Soon-Shiong explained the decision in a lengthy post on X, writing, quote, "The editorial board was provided the opportunity to draft a factual analysis of all the positive and negative policies by each candidate during their tenures at the White House and how these policies affected the nation. In this way, with this clear and nonpartisan information side by side, our readers could decide who would be worthy of being president for the next 4 years. Instead of adopting this path as suggested, the editorial board chose to remain silent, and I accepted their decision. Please #vote. So it seems like the era of the newspaper endorsement is kind of fading. Back in 2022, we saw a similar move from papers owned by Alden Global Capital, such as the Boston Herald, the Orlando Sentinel, where they decided that they weren't going to do any endorsements whatsoever. I guess the question here is, are the billionaire owners exerting their own influence on the editorial board and not allowing these papers to retain their editorial independence?
I mean, I think so. It's pretty clear. The LA Times editorial board editor, resigned, as we stated, knowing what happened internally. There was an incredible report out in The New Yorker a couple of days ago by Susan Glasser about the billionaires backing Trump. And it's fascinating because many of the billionaires that are coming together to back Trump were actually outspoken about not supporting him after January 6th, but it seems like they all had some sort of meeting where they came together, far-right billionaires all the way to, centrist, probably center-left billionaires who would have supported Hillary Clinton and did support Hillary Clinton. They are coming out and giving millions and millions of dollars to Donald Trump's super PACs and to Donald Trump campaign. The Blackstone CEO, Steven Schwartzman, has been one of the most vocal. Nelson Peltz, he came out against Donald Trump and is now all there. John Catsimatidis is a billionaire in New York, but he's conservative, very conservative. Steve Wynn, Mary Madelson, the typical ones. But it is interesting to me that a lot of these billionaires, not all of them, do have investments in China. And so that was one of the things that came out in these reports, is there is a concern about the Biden-Harris administration's role in cracking down on some of the, obviously, China's actions towards the United States recently, but also just some of their trade policies, which are really to focus more on manufacturing in this country. And it's interesting because Donald Trump does rail against China, and his whole tariff game, which we all know is not something that's doable, is a play to the base. But the reality is that he's incredibly pro-China, incredibly pro-business, and wants to continue to have tax cuts for the billionaires, which he provided, of course, in his administration, and Biden is very opposed to.
Well, Trump did institute the tariffs on China that the Biden administration continued, right?
Those are minor tariffs, but it's a bad policy. He wants to economists across the board say this is a bad policy. It's going to increase prices.
But I guess my point
in the
is,
country.
My point is separate from the economic impact of it, which we could debate all day.
Yeah.
But that you say that Biden is the one who's been tough on China and that Trump has just been giving lip service, but he's the one who instituted the tariffs that the Biden administration is still using to this day.
And I don't agree with that. And, they should reverse that policy, but he wants to go even further.
But isn't that tough on China to make it more expensive for them to export goods?
I think it would be... Joe Biden has been so adversarial towards China, vocally adversarial.
So?
Well, first off, it is to be speaking outwardly as considering China as an adversary. For the Biden administration to explicitly say that, we saw what happened with the balloons that were being spread, the Chinese balloons that were going across the country, and how they were spying. The fact that our intelligence community has repeatedly called out China for their actions in the Philippines, because against international law, Chinese boats have been brushing against Philippine boats in Philippine water. I mean, that is an act of war, essentially. I mean, this is not something that I think is disputable. Tariffs, continuing tariffs under the Trump administration tariffs, I think that's a wrong move. It's hard to reverse. I don't understand why they're making that decision, but I don't think that the tariff move on Trump to increase those tariffs is smart for anybody but China.
Let me pose this question to you as well. Why do you think Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in the process of defunding Confucius Institutes in the United States because they were found to basically be spy centers for the Chinese Communist Party at universities? Why do you think the Biden administration decided to reverse that move and continue fully funding them?
Well, I don't think that any of them are fully funded by the United States government, so let's make that very clear. Having tax incentives is very different, and you can't just rightfully release tax incentives. That's a long process, and that sets a precedent for other universities, including Catholic universities and Catholic schools. So just keeping that in mind, that we do have separation of church and state, and you can't just pick who you want to receive tax incentives or not. And it's not that we are fully funding. The only schools that we fully fund are public schools, fully fund.
Right, but I'm saying the government gives money to Confucius Institutes.
How so? As tax incentives?
No, they actually fund them.
That's fundamentally
through public
untrue.
Universities.
They're not public universities. Confucius Institutes are private universities. They're funded by.
They have within public universities. They have Confucius Institutes as part of the campus.
That is
the same way you would have like the let's say you have like the Bill Ackman Center for Free Speech at Harvard as like a made-up example. That's the way the Confucius
institution.
Okay, well then at the University of Maryland, okay, as an example, you have these centers, right, that are funded as part of the university. That's what the Confucius Institutes are as part of the university system in the United States.
Are you sure they're not so first off, if they're CCP backed, that would be a national security issue, and most
agreed,
likely.
And that's the issue. And so that's why Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was moving to defund them, and Biden said, no, we're not going to do that anymore.
Are they funded by the CCP, or are they funded by the United States government? And Mike Pompeo, by the way, has blasted Donald Trump on his China policy and has blasted him on his foreign policy. And he's parading around Europe right now talking about that and raising the alarm for European leaders that Donald Trump is not only in cahoots with China and Russia, but that they should be alarmed by his actions. So, if you're going to talk about Mike Pompeo right now, he's not necessarily the defender of the Donald Trump China
certainly
policy.
He didn't move to defund the Confucius Institutes without the approval of Donald Trump.
I think what we need to understand, it's one thing to make a claim, but I need you to tell me, where in the line item does it say that it's funded? Just making a claim that something's funded, that's a vast claim, and we know that in every single institution, there are private donors, especially with a public university, but if it's CCP funded, then it's not U.S. funded.
It can be both.
How is that the case?
Okay.
No, you're putting the burden on me, but I'm putting the burden back on you to prove it.
Yeah,
because
okay.
You can't just throw it, moving the goalposts.
This has been well reported. I'll find the source for you.
In conservative publications, which have a questionable,
right, because the mainstream media has a great track record.
Well, we have fact checkers.
And let's get back.
We have fact checkers.
Conservative media doesn't have fact checkers. Have you ever worked at a conservative media outlet?
Let's go back here. We're moving the goalposts.
How are we moving the goalposts?
Because we're talking about Elon Musk, and we're talking about
you said that
Jeff
Trump.
Bezos.
You said that Trump wasn't tough on China, and I challenged your claim. That's not moving.
But that wasn't Trump. That was Mike Pompeo, and it was based on a claim that only appeared in conservative publications in which you can't even explain.
You said you didn't even know about it till I told you about it 30 seconds ago.
Because I don't read far-right conspiratorial media.
Okay.
It's
been reported in the Wall Street Journal, but I guess that's far right to you.
What happened?
But nonetheless, let's go back to the editorial board endorsements, okay?
Yes.
Because we've obviously gotten off topic. But do you think these even matter? I mentioned trust in media is at an all-time low. Does it actually even help a candidate for them to endorse them? Maybe it hurts them, because a lot of Americans, for good reasons, don't trust the mainstream media anymore.
Well, I think the people that are reading the newspaper tend to be more center-right to left, and so it could make a difference when you have somebody who's undecided who reads the paper every day, especially local papers. People still, whatever remaining local papers exist, people still read them for their rationale and their reasoning. Then it also gets picked up in the media and becomes a conversation topic. So I do think it's incredibly powerful when the New York Times makes an endorsement, when the LA Times makes an endorsement, when the Washington Post makes an endorsement, but all the way down to the Texas Tribune, to other papers around the country. Because in the morning, people wake up, they read their newspaper, physical form, on their phone. But again, that's for a certain type of voter. a more educated voter, a more informed voter, a more media savvy voter. And if they're not endorsing, that's actually more of a signal. And I think that the billionaires are losing the narrative here, in that it makes them look bad, like they're putting their thumb on the scale of democracy by weaponizing, the free press at this point.
And I guess my pushback to that would be, wouldn't that be a good thing that the billionaires don't want to use these papers that they have purchased as a means of influencing voters?
I don't think that's influencing voters. I think newspapers have a long tradition of making endorsements, and billionaires it's not their role. They're not the editors. I mean, Jeff Bezos said he's not going to get involved in editorial. Well, what's happening right now?
All right, we're going to leave it there. We have a lot more topics to cover today on Rising. Stick around.